Hey, it's TDA and welcome to the start of my updated Masterclass series. This is meant to be a step-by-step, clean and super organized playthrough. If you are an experienced player, this will likely give you some ideas for updating your blueprints, and if you are a new player, this will help you get a grasp on not just the basics of the game, but on keeping your factory safe from the enemy. Now this is intended to be a play-along series, and if you do want to play along, all you need to do is start a new game and put in this cluster seed when you start up the game. And you will find yourself on exactly the same planet as I am on. Now, if you are a very new player, you might be inclined to completely turn off the enemy forces at the start of your game, and there's nothing wrong with that. I enjoyed the game for almost 3 years without combat, so I'm sure you will too. However, combat can actually work in your favor, and it does add a lot to the game, and to demonstrate, I will be playing on a fairly high difficulty setting. You definitely do not need to do this to play along, but by following what I do, this will help you get ready for your own higher difficulty game whenever you feel like it. Okay, here we are on the starting planet getting bombarded with tutorials, but first things first, I want to look like myself. So let's look up my default coloring scheme. That looks a lot better. Let's apply that, and remember that you can recolor your mech in whatever way you want. Now, something else that we need to do is rename the planet to Bin There Done That, who is the newest member at the highest tier of the channel. So thank you for supporting the channel, and if you guys like to support the channel as well, you can consider becoming a member. Now, you might be inclined to start building your first facility near the starting veins that have conveniently been placed close to you on whatever planet you start out on, but that's not necessarily the best place to start in the new combat update. So we're going to zoom out and press the letter N, so we have the north of the planet facing north. That makes it easier to kind of orientate yourself. Now you will find the enemy on the opposite side of the planet. As you can see, I have 3 bases, but you will likely only have 1 if you're playing on the default settings. But what you basically want to do is move closer to the enemy. Yes, I know that sounds really weird, but that will actually help you make sure that you know where they're coming from, because they will always attack you in the shortest distance. But if you start on the opposite side of the planet and you start expanding, that might mean that at one point they come from the north, then if you expand a little bit south, they might be coming from the south, and so on. So it makes it a little less predictable. You do still want to have an ample supply of iron, copper, stone, and pretty much any other materials that you can find on your planet, like oil and coal. So actually this is a pretty good starting position if we wouldn't have combat. But let's see, I already scouted ahead a little bit, and over here on this side, we are a little bit closer to the enemy, not too close, but we have some iron, we have some copper, we have some more copper over here, we have stone, we have oil. We will need to take the coal from a little further away. I think there's some coal over here as well. That's going to be a little annoying, but we have everything we need right here, so I think this is going to be a perfect place to settle. It'll just be a little walk. Before you leave, don't forget to actually mine your little starting facility. You might want to mine a couple of these trees and stones as well, just to get yourself going before you start moving. And you want to queue up the first few techs. Now, you need to start with electromagnetism to unlock the miners. After that, basic logistics, the automatic metallurgy, and the basic assembling to start. And then after that, go for the electromagnetic matrix. This is the default start that you always want to unlock first, whatever you do. Now, in order to make this, you're going to need some magnetic coils, and after that you need circuit boards as well as gears. You can actually already make the coils from the starting materials you get from your base, and you can also start working on some of the gears, for example. So you might as well do that while you're moving to the starting location. Okay, so if you're playing along, just to make 100% sure you know where we are, press N, so you're facing north. We are on the right side of the enemy, just in between these 2 copper veins and this iron vein, and you should recognize this location if you're on the same seat as I am. Now, what we want to do is place our first miner that we got from researching the first technology, and you want to make sure that every miner you place ideally has at least 6 veins covering it, so you see the 6x, because that means that with 2 miners you can exactly fill 1 Mark 1 belt. So 6 times, that's what you want to be aiming for with every miner that you place. Get the wind turbine up and running close to your mining machine so it's actually powered, and then by pressing Ctrl and clicking on the miner you can just empty whatever is in there, so you don't have to manually get your stuff from there. Now, in the meanwhile, let's move over to the copper vein to get some copper as well, and start crafting the materials that you are lacking for your next few resource items. So in my case, that is the gears. I actually made the circuit boards instead. And after that, you're going to need some more gears, coils, and so on to just unlock whatever we have left here. Now, while you're doing the research and you're manually mining, you might as well just make a couple of buildings in the meanwhile as well to speed up the process a little bit. So make another miner, make some more power units in terms of the turbines as well as the power towers, and then place your second miner somewhere around your copper production. And again, at least 6 veins will do. If you have more than 6, that's fine as well. Make sure that miner is of course also powered, and you might as well want to connect these two up so you can kind of stand in between and just collect the raw resources and then start queuing up whatever you need in order to finish the last few research items that you are lacking in order to get blue science. In the meanwhile, you might as well just start mining some trees for fuel, because you're going to need those logs and plant fuel in order to make sure you don't run out of power yourself. There's no coal nearby, so that's a little inconvenient, but if you do have coal nearby in whatever seed you are playing on, then that's probably the better alternative. You're also going to need a couple of these logs and plants and stuff like that for some of the technologies at some point, so there's no waste in doing that, and especially picking up some of this stone early on is really convenient, because you do need some stone for some of the earlier buildings. Okay, with these very bare necessities out of the way, it's time to start building our super organized starting base. And in order to do that, I'm going to place a first smelter somewhere over here, I think. Now, we're going to build a few more smelters, and every time we're going to take 2 spaces in between and place a new smelter, because there's a couple of different materials that we will want to build. Now, before you start placing this on your own seed, if you're not on the exact same seed as I am, take a note of the building space you have, because you're going to need quite a bit of building space to the east or west direction. You always want to be building from east to west or west to east, because the closer you get to the poles, the more shifts there are in the grid, and that can really mess up how your factory looks. It's not the end of the world, but generally speaking, it's a good habit to always build from east to west to avoid those problems. Now, in this case, we are actually very close, I think, to the equator. Yeah, we're actually standing almost on top of it. So there's no shifts in the grid anywhere close to the equator. So this is a very convenient place to be building for several reasons. Now, the first 5 smelters that we're going to be building are one for copper on the top, the magnets in the middle, another one for copper, then we have one for iron, and then we have another one from iron at the bottom here. Now, it doesn't really matter which ones you connect first, but I do recommend going for the iron initially and then hook the other one up with copper. You're going to need to make some belts for that, so make sure you queue up whatever you can build. In general, in the early phases of the game, you will always want to be handcrafting some buildings that you can, because otherwise your Icarus is not really doing anything anyway, so you might as well make advantage of the fact that you have this whole walking machine that can produce whatever you need. Once you have the first few connections up, you might want to put in another smelter for the copper as well as the iron over here. And then I recommend that you place down an assembler over here and connect it with another one of these sorters directly to one of these smelters, and then set this to produce gears. That means that we now have an easy way to get some iron, we have an easy way to get some gears, and we have an easy way to get some copper, which is going to cover a lot of the basics that we are normally producing by hand, as you can see. So you might want to cancel these constructions, get some more of these materials, and then re-queue them, and that will make things a lot quicker and easier to get going. Also, hook up the magnets as well as the secondary iron. You will need a lot of iron, so you might as well. And ignore the flashing power lights initially, because the more power you are consuming, the faster the thread will build and you will get attacked. So it's actually not a bad thing to have low power initially, just to give yourself some time to set your base up and get ready to go. Now, once you do, and this is pretty much as much as you need early on, at least for the moment, you're going to want to research weapon systems. They're in the technology tree a little bit further to the bottom, and this will allow you to build turrets as well as ammunition for those turrets. So make sure you research that, and then we will be getting ready to defend ourselves. With that research out of the way, again, just cancel whatever you were making and start building some turrets, just to make sure we have a way to defend ourselves. Now, in order to actually make sure we have ammunition for those turrets, we're going to place down once again an assembler like this, just connect it up with a sorter, place a box. You should be able to create these depots now, and then hook that up as well. In order to make these depots, you are going to need some of that stone I was talking about earlier on. Now this assembler is actually going to automate making the ammo. You are not going to need a huge amount of that. You're not going to get a huge amount thanks to the low power. So the next thing we want to do, and hopefully you made some of those wind turbines in the meanwhile like I showed you, we can use those to kind of power things up. Now what we can actually do is, because we know the enemy will be coming over here from the left, we can set up some wind turbines like this. Now once you do this, this will make the power consumption shoot up and you will get attacked pretty quickly. So let's make sure you have some turrets before you do that. Okay, once the first wave is incoming, make sure you grab some ammunition from the box. Make sure you split that up in a couple of different stacks. You might want to give yourself some ammo as well, so you can defend yourself. And let's place down these turrets and just make sure they're in the power zone of your wind turbines. Then use those split stacks, make sure you put some ammo in all of your turrets, and make sure you stick close to your turrets when the first few waves are incoming. We should see the first units coming in very soon. Might be able to grab some more ammunition from over here. Hello? Yep. Good, so we can add in one more turret like that. There we go. As you can see, the first half of that wave was not a problem. There's some slower units coming after that. Now this wave will be a lot smaller if you're not playing on the high difficulty that I am. Just stick close to your tower so you can repair them, and as you can see, even at this difficulty level I have no problem defending myself against this first wave with 4 of these towers. We're going to get 2 more waves. I'm going to skip that because they're going to be exactly the same, but you get the idea now. Once you cleared out the waves, you should see the threat dropping down a lot lower, and it should be quite a while before you get the next one. Make sure you press Z and hover up whatever drop materials there are out here that the Dark Fog have dropped that you killed. It's a pretty easy way to get some more advanced materials. For example, you might get some fuel, some energy shards from them. It's a pretty efficient fuel, so you might as well use it. As you can see, I actually got some oil apparently and some other random resources, so there's free stuff to get from killing the Dark Fog. Okay, time to skill up and make the nicest looking starting facility ever that includes everything you're going to need. So, I put down a box to make sure we have an easy way to collect gears in general. It's very nice to have the limit for the box set to something less than maximum. Maybe just the first row will do, just to make sure that you're not gathering up thousands of units if you don't really need them to. Now, in order to organize our base, we're going to place 9 of these smelters in a row, but we're going to press tab once, so they're spaced out a little bit with sets of 3, as you can see. Now, if you press tab more often, you can have different types of layouts. As you can see, you can space them out in whatever way you want. And if you keep pressing tab, they will scale back. But for now, we only need 9. Now, we don't actually need 9 of these to be built, but we want to have some space in between the next assembler that we're going to build after that. We're actually going to take out these middle 3. This is just to make sure we have some building room in between. Now, in order to scale things up, there's a couple of things to note. First of all, we actually do not want the assembler on this side of the thing. We want it over here. And you can actually build the buildings yourself if you place them down by holding the left mouse button. You don't need your drone to do everything. You can help them out. And that's something new in the combat update. And it's super, super useful. Now, we actually want this to produce the circuit boards because we have copper and the iron right over here. We need to hook this up to a belt like so. And in order to make sure we actually have some copper incoming, we're going to add in another mining machine, at least start with 1. You're going to want to add a second one to this because these 6 smelters, as well as these 6 smelters, can actually handle the total output of 2 miners. So you want to make sure you have 2 iron miners connected to this belt over here, and then 2 copper miners to the incoming belt over here. And just make sure you leave yourself some room when you're making these belts. Add in a little box to make sure you have somewhere to collect your circuit boards, and make sure that your sorters are actually facing the correct way, because that is not the way that sorter is supposed to be moving. Yep, now it actually works. And then the next thing we want to do is set up a very similar setup for the magnetic coils that we need the magnets as well as copper for. And look what we have here. We have the actual magnets. Now, you might want to first build the belt before you start dragging these out, because that way you can already make the sorters included once you start dragging them out, but they won't actually connect until you have a belt in place. So if you do it like this, let me show you. We also need a sorter, of course, actually need sorters in general because I'm out of sorters. So let's queue those up again. Just make sure that you're always producing something. And then we are going to do that like this. And then we can just drag them out, press tab. And then like this, we can have this all up and running really easily. So this is starting to look like something, and make sure that at this point you start filling in some of the power as well. Keep it to the south of your base because right now the enemy is slightly to the north, so placing these down to the south will make sure that they are still attacking us kind of in this diagonal, hopefully. You might want to add some additional turrets at some point, but for now, as you can see, we still have a lot of threat to go, so no reason to stress about that too much. What we're actually going to do is expand some of these assembling machines because, as you can see, we have full belts, so we're not actually making use of all the materials that we're producing. So what I want to do is actually build, let's see, 2 more of these like this and 2 more of these like that. Now this is actually going to be circuit boards, and that means we will also need to expand these belts. Now remember that both of these are actually using the copper, so that's super efficient. We can expand the belt like this, and we can expand the belt like this. Now, unlike what I just showed you, you can actually just opt to make the belts like this and then just add them in. It's all super fast. We're not making things at a huge scale so far, so you don't have to worry too much about being extremely efficient in the way you build everything. You can always just copy paste it like I'm doing right now. Now, this will actually be the main ingredients that we need to automate our blue science, because that's going to use both the magnetic rings and the circuit boards. So we're going to set up a little science facility over here. Something like this. You're going to need to build some matrix labs for that, and in order to do that, you're going to need some glass. So mine some additional stone if you ran out by now. There should be plenty of that around, so that shouldn't be a problem. We're going to automate that soon, don't worry. But for now, we're going to focus on getting our science going. Now, in order to do that, we are going to set these up. We're going to connect these to the belts over here that will have the outgoing materials, because right now we're putting some stuff in the boxes over here. But what we're actually going to do is make sure we hook those up. I actually reloaded, so apparently I didn't have my sorters in here anymore. But by doing it something like this, actually, let's make this a little bit more neat and put it on the belt like this. We also need, of course, to connect the iron like that. Copy, 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 copy. And as you can see, we have a lot of resources already coming into the blue science facilities over here. And this will start producing all of that for us. However, we also need some matrix labs in order to process this. Ta-da! And we have automated research over here. Now, of course, we're going to improve on this, but once you have the initial setup, make sure you start researching right away, because you don't want to waste any time, and you might as well get your research going. You have a lot of that to do. First of all, make sure you get the upgraded logistics system all the way in the top. We really need these splitters, as you will see in a moment. Then after that, I recommend getting some of the cheaper stuff like the engines. It's only 20 cubes, as well as the electric magnetic drive. It's all things we're going to include in our little basic setup over here. Then after that, I recommend going to the top, getting steel. And then after that, getting the smelting purification, so we get access to silicon. After that, I recommend going for reclamation, so we get access to foundations. I promise if you're a new player, this will all make sense, but this is all going to tie into our starting facility in just a moment. After that, you might want to get the combustible units over here. And once you have those, you can pretty much just clean up whatever research we have left in terms of only blue cubes. You definitely want the battlefield analysis base as well, for example. And after that, just queue up anything that's related to fluids, plasma extracting, chemical engineering. We're going to need all of that, but there's no rush in getting it. Just make sure you are not letting your research sit still at any time. As soon as you research something, just queue up something new. Remember to stack up your matrix labs like this. You can stack up to 3 in the beginning of the game, so you might as well do that to save some space. And after that, you're probably going to be attacked pretty soon anyway, so let's refocus a little bit on our defense. Now, in terms of defense, the first few turrets are no longer going to cut it, especially not if you're playing on a higher difficulty level. And what you can actually do is put a belt right through them, like I'm showing over here. So this has an advantage of letting you just click on a belt, selecting your inventory, and then just put it in like this, and this allows you to stack up your ammunition in all of your towers without having to manually click them one by one. Now, of course, we don't want to do this by hand for very long, but in case you need to, this allows you to do exactly what an automated system would do. Now, instead of this, we're going to connect this belt up to a ammunition production facility over here, and that will look something like this. Now, in my case, I'm getting some bigger waves now, so I'm actually going to need to stick to my defense a little bit. If you lose some buildings, don't panic, it's not the end of the world. Just make sure you don't get yourself killed. I actually lost a building over here, a wind turbine. Just left click on it and it will get rebuilt. Your drones will focus on repairing as well. And as you can see, I built an entire belt over here. I expanded the copper production a little bit over here as well. Again, 6 of these smelters to make sure we have all the production capabilities to satisfy an entire belt. And then we are going to be building, again, 3 assemblers making the ammunition. Now, 3 assemblers is actually a little bit more than this setup of these 6 smelters can handle, but there's no such thing as having too much ammunition, so we might as well. Another trick to do with your turrets is to actually build them in a square as much as possible. This is much more sturdy in terms of defense than putting them in one long line, although having a long line makes it less likely for the enemy to creep around it, so it has its pros and cons. But as long as it's in the right location, squaring them up is actually the optimal defense. Now, as you can see, I have this belt going through like this, and it's going to go through like this, and then it's kind of looping back on itself. This makes sure there's always a lot of ammunition moving through the system, and the benefit of that is that if it's using the ammunition while it's shooting at the enemy, it will get replenished as soon as possible. Now, if you're playing on a lower difficulty level, that's not going to be an issue, but it's a good habit to get into once you move on to a higher difficulty level, if that's something you ever want to do. Yeah, other than that, let's focus on scaling up the rest of our factory, so we have this little initial starting facility up and running as well as we can. So I'm guessing you see the pattern now, but we're going to expand the gear production now, and we're going to do that in exactly the same way as we've been doing so far. Now, the gears are actually going to be on the bottom of this belt. Make sure they're nicely aligned with the assemblers that you already have. And again, remember that you can help your bots build some stuff if that's what you need to do in order to speed things up. Let's copy in the recipe over here. And then what we're actually going to do is we're going to use some of these new splitters that I produced. Now, the splitter by default will look like this. This is actually not the splitter that we want to use. If you press the R button, you can shift the direction of the splitter, but if you press the tab button, you can use different layouts. There's actually 3 of them. Let me show you. You have, this is the cross splitter. Then we have this one that has 2 inputs on the same side on a horizontal level, and then we have another one on a different level basically, but one is actually going straight through and the other one is on a higher level but crossed instead of being the cross on the bottom floor. Now, the version that we need is this one, and we're going to be placing those something like that, just outside of the range, in line with the storage units that we already have. We have the outgoing belt going into the splitter like this, and then we're going to be placing a box on top of that. Now, you can place a box on whichever layout of splitter that you want, so it also works with the cross, for example. But honestly, the reason I'm using this is twofold. I like this layout a lot better. It just looks less stupid, honestly. But also, this one is a little bit more convenient, I think, in terms of actually looping things back on itself, as you will see in a moment. And this is what that looks like when you do that for all our supply lines. Now, as you can see, I have some of these on a direct line when we have a straight throughput, and if we are looping back, so what, for example, we're doing here with the coils and the circuit boards as well as the gears, actually move this box a little bit. I actually put these in line with the production facilities because I think it looks a little bit more organized, and there's a second reason for that as well. Because we actually need to loop these things back on themselves, because I actually flipped around this belt. And remember, you can actually flip around entire belts if you want with the press of a button now. So yeah, as you can see, you don't need to replace your belts. You can just press the reverse path. Very convenient. And basically what I did is I reversed this belt as well, put them into the box, and then had an outgoing belt turning back on itself back to the production facilities over here for the blue science. Now, the reason I did that is because we want to use some of these things in different places as well. and just having all the building materials in close proximity helps. If for whatever reason you want to start building something that you don't have materials for, let's say for example the iron ingots, I can just say, oh, okay, just give me a couple of stacks of this, maybe a couple of stacks of all of this other stuff, and then just start building whatever you want. It's just very convenient to have everything close together. At this point, you probably notice that you are going to need more and more stone, so making sure we have that automated as well is a simple matter of mining the stone facilities that we have over here, the stone resources I should say, and bringing those into a couple of smelters on the bottom here. So I added a few more rows of smelters. Actually didn't build this final line yet because I ran out of stone. And one of these lines is going to produce glass, and then the other one is going to produce stone. Or I think it's actually called concrete. Is it? Yeah, well, no, it's actually stone bricks. I was right the first time around. Anyway, that's what it's going to be producing. And also make sure you fill up the other belts in case you haven't done so yet. You should have enough resources here to fill out all of these 3 iron-related belts as well as the 2 copper-related belts with just the 2 nodes that we have up here. Okay, there goes that. So that means we have all the stone and glass in production as well. Now, honestly, you don't need that much glass, but we might as well just get it up and running because we can. Make sure you keep researching, and also make sure that you start working on some of your personal upgrades. For example, upgrading the drone engines makes your production or your construction so much faster. It's really noticeable in the beginning. And getting yourself an energy shield is going to help you stay alive in case you're getting larger and larger attacks. Now, as you can see, I scaled up my defensive facilities in the meanwhile as well, just to make sure I don't die from stupid drones getting in my face. Again, if you're playing on a lower difficulty, you won't need anywhere near as many turrets, but you might as well in case you can. And, well, it looks really nice, so it has that going for it as well. Okay, so at this point, you probably produced a couple of hundred of belts already. Now, this is actually a pretty easy thing to produce, so that's not the biggest thing in the world, but let's make sure we have that automated. It's by far the thing that you need the most, and the same thing holds for sorters, so you're actually burning through those at a pretty high rate as well. Now, in order to make belts, we are going to need the gears as well as iron, and we have gears right here. So what we can actually do is bring a second line of iron like this. Now you have to press the up button to switch to the upper outgoing port over here. Then we will get a raised belt like this, and then we can bring that belt down again by pressing the down key and bring that over here. Now let's place another one of these assemblers like so. Actually, we need one more space in between. Actually, let's bring this one down a little further so we can actually have the outgoing belts go like this. Let's copy one of those. Let's copy a storage unit as well. Now, the nice thing about copying storage units is it will actually copy the settings in terms of the limitations if you copy it from an existing one, so you don't have to reset it every time. And by bringing in the iron like this, and of course connecting a sorter to that, and an outgoing sorter like this, and then an incoming sorter over here, if I can actually reach that, like so. That means we now have automated the belt production, and we will get an infinite amount of belts over here as long as we don't run out of resources. But that's not going to happen anytime soon, because we didn't use the starting patches, but we used the larger ones further away. Now, this one is actually not going to make the belts. This one is going to make the initial Mark 1 sorters. We're also going to need some iron for that, so we can just connect those up. We're also going to need circuit boards, so let me bring in another belt from over here. Something like this. Now, you will have some crossing belts, so make sure that they're on different heights when you do that. But other than that, it's a pretty nice and neat looking facility, I think. And we now have the main things that we need in order to scale up our production in a complete automated production. That's a lot of productions there. Now, I'm going to be under attack, but I'm actually going to build some smelters over here in between the assemblers. Now, space them out a little bit so they're nicely aligned with the existing gears over here, and these are going to be producing steel, because that's something we don't have automated just yet. Don't you just love it when the plan comes together and it nicely fits together? I don't know about you, but I think this looks extremely organized, especially considering the amount of different resources we have in here. We even have a little bit of mole production in here, as we call it. Actually, this entire thing is kind of a mole. And if you're not entirely sure where that phrase comes from, the idea is that you can just go shop around for whatever you need at a glance without having to produce anything yourself. That's why it's called like a mall, when you're going to a mall and in shopping. Anyway, in order to make our mall even better, what we need is some other production facilities, because we just unlocked electric motors, and we also have combustible units and engines which are all used for a ton of things. So let's get those up and running as well. In order to space things out, I would recommend placing a single assembler in between some of these power facilities, then deleting that, and then place 2 assemblers making engines, or I should say electric motors, because these are the engines, but I used to call these other things engines, so this is just confusing to me. Sorry, electric motors is what you want to be producing here. Why? Well, they need a couple of things. They actually need 3 things. You need the gears, you need the iron ingots, and you need the magnetic coils. Now, we happen to have both the gears as well as the iron right over here, so that's very convenient and not completely coincidental, because of course I planned this out. And we actually have the belt with gears over here, and you can see we have plenty of those, so all we need to do is connect those up. Now, similarly, in terms of spacing, we can also set up some production for the foundations. You can use these to alternate the terrain and make the terrain look a lot better. I ideally use the without decoration portion, but you can use that to kind of fill in these gaps. Now, you're going to need soil pile for that, and this is where the dark fog comes in. Because of all the units I have been destroying over here, I actually get a ton of soil pile just from destroying those units. Now, if you don't have that and you're playing without combat or whatever, what you will actually need to do is go around. Every time you place a building on something that's vaguely a hill, you get a little bit of soil pile from that, but it's quite annoying to gather it yourself. Destroying robots makes it really, really easy, because they actually fly the soil pile straight to you. Anyway, let's set up some belts. Now, we're almost done setting up our mall, but the next thing we need is coal, and considering that's going to come all the way from over here, we only need 2 miners to get all the coal we need for the moment, but it's still a long distance, so it's a good thing we have automated that belt production. Now, we actually want to start placing the combustible units, so that's where is it? This one. This is actually a very efficient fuel source for your Icarus as your mech itself, so you might as well use it for that, but it's also used in a couple of other things like missiles, for example, so you're going to need quite a bit of that, so you might as well start producing a whole stockpile of it. So you want to start producing those combustible units all the way on up here. Just make sure you align it with your existing assemblers, and make sure you kind of align it with the existing matrix labs as well, so it looks neat and organized. You're going to feed in the coal from the top and then have the combustible units exported on the top as well, because we need this space to build our engine production. At this point, setting up the engine production is really simple as well, because all we need to do is set down these 3 assemblers like this. We're going to set this to produce engines. We need coils as well as copper for that, like this. We also already have the actual coils over here, because we're also using these for the blue science. So that means we only need to bring in the copper, which we can do either from down here, like so, or we can bring that in from up here, because we also have more copper than we need for our ammo production. As you can see, this box is entirely full already. Just make sure that you combine these belts in a nice looking way. If you want to do it like this, you can. I just don't like how this T intersection looks, so this is why I every now and then opt for this one. It's completely up to you whether or not you prefer one or the other. Of course, we are also going to need to have somewhere to stockpile all of that. So let's have an outgoing belt like so, and connect everything up with our Mark II sorters now. So we can do this like this, and you can see how easily you can set things up now. Okay, so now we have engines in our production line as well. And that brings us to the end of this first episode of this masterclass. Now, I actually think this is the most organized, most efficient way to set up a starting base that I have ever designed. Now, if you've been on this channel for a longer time, you know I have made quite a few versions of a starting base by now, but I do think this is the most efficient way to go. I should probably address the important topic here that some of you might have been typing in the comments already. TDA, where is the mall? Now, I would say this is the mall, but some of you might be thinking more of something like this. a facility where you bring in kind of a bus-like type of set of materials that you then use to craft all the basic items that you need. So you can see, for example, again over here, things like the Mark 1 belts, Mark 1 sorters, but also things like smelters, assemblers, pretty much all the basic materials. Now, the reason I actually don't think you need to build a mall like this very early on is because it actually takes quite a bit of time to build this. It's a huge amount of belts, huge amount of sorters and assemblers and things like that. And honestly, you don't need most of these buildings in large quantities. The only thing that you really need in large quantities are the belts and sorters, which we did automate in the base that I just showed you. But everything else, you might need a few dozen of these assemblers and smelters. But other than that, all the other buildings, you maybe need like a handful. And of course, you're going to need more and more of them as you go. But at some point, we will build a mall. I just don't think it's efficient to do that early game, so don't stress about it. It's a nice project, and it's definitely something you might want to consider doing if it's like your first time playing, because it just feels really nice to have everything automated. But don't underestimate how many resources it takes to set this up until, of course, all the boxes are full. You definitely don't want to set the boxes to full, by the way. Just set them to a few places, so you're never going to be producing more than a few stacks of this anyway. But yeah. Keep that in mind, that this is something that you will see a lot of other content creators, including myself, build in their Let's Plays. I actually don't think you should be doing this early on. Remember, you have all the building materials that you're ever going to need for all those basic buildings right here close at hand. You have all the fuel you're ever going to need in terms of the combustible units over here as well. So in other words, this is the entire facility that we have on the planet, so it's not like we're going to cover large distances so far. In the next episode, we are going to focus on getting probably both the red signs as well as the yellow signs going on. I spent a little bit more time explaining the setup of this basic blue science base, so that will give us a bit more time to focus on the more advanced stuff in the next episode. If you like this episode, make sure you like it. It really helps the algorithm find this content, so make sure that you do if you appreciated it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure that you do so you don't miss anything new coming on this channel. If you're still here, you're awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.